You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hey guys, it's me again, Mighty Blue or Steve Adams, and you found Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. As many of you know, we talk with hikers, often about the Appalachian Trail, though not always, as well as people who hike and can contribute to our understanding of a particular topic on the trail. A few weeks ago, I mentioned that I'd like to talk with a veterinarian who was also a hiker to inform us all about hiking with a dog from a vet's perspective. We all know people who say, my dog loves to hike, and well, we can't actually ask the dog its opinion on the subject, so I wanted to get the inside track, so to speak. Well, at Trail Days, I was in the author's tent right behind Nancy East, herself an accomplished hiker, mountain rescuer, and crucially for this episode, a vet. She agreed to come on the show, so I was kind of committed without knowing anything about the subject. So guess where I turned to for help? Yep, back to ChaptGPT. It came up with some pretty far-out questions, actually, but I managed to distill some really good ones and put them to Nancy. I had to reword them a bit, but they seem to cover the subject. We'll hear from Nancy in a moment. Then we catch up with just two of our class of 23 members, Steve Nota, our Bostonian from Down Under, and Joanne Flagg, our flip-flopper already into Maine. They'll be on after Nancy. And we'll have a shortened reading from Then the Hail Came, as I have something deeply personal to tell you, and I don't want the show to run too long again. So let's get to it and introduce you to Nancy East. Today's guest is Nancy East. She perfectly fits the bill of a hiker who happens to have been a veterinarian. Hey Nancy, thanks for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Steve.
And you're no longer a veterinarian, is that right?
I am pretty much retired from, or I am retired from clinical practice.
Right.
In 2020, I did that. I still do a little bit of teaching with a community college for emergency service personnel who might respond to a injured or sick pet on scene, but that's about the extent of it now, other than things like this.
Well, funnily enough, I hadn't realised the extent of your website this morning, which just has got so much great information. So I can't ignore the fact you're quite well known for a particular hiking event. So tell us about what you've done, the Cliff Notes version of your hiking, the highlight of your hiking life, I guess, in some ways for people who know you.
Sure. Yeah. So in 2020, inspired by my involvement with search and rescue in Western North Carolina, I hiked all the trails in Great Smoky Mountains National Park. So it amounted to about 950 miles that I hiked in 29 days and set the speed record, raised a ton of money for the park for their preventative search and rescue program. So it was something that I was really proud to help them with. And
you say on your website that you were never an athletic type person, and yet you broke the speed record over the age of 50, you mentioned. So how'd that come about? I mean, were you trying to race for it then?
Yeah. And I was actually not 50, but my very dear friend, Chris Ford, he was a little bit over 50. I was 47, I believe, at the time, or 48, actually, 48, I think. But anyway, we did this as a team effort, but it was inspired by my involvement with a search specifically in the Smokies near Clingman's Dome for a missing mom.
Right.
And her life on paper had a lot of parallels to mine. 3 children, about the same age, all these things that just really resonated with me as a mother. And she died tragically in this incident, and she was lost on one of the most popular trails in the whole park during a popular season. So it was just one of those things that people were fairly incredulous about. But as a search and rescue team member, I could easily see how something like this could unfold and just be that perfect storm of events to lead to somebody's demise. So I just wanted to pay it forward and to hopefully prevent something like this from happening again. And, trying to, as a middle-aged minivan driving mom, break an ultra runner's speed record. It sounded fun at the time, and it actually was a heck of a lot of fun, and challenged me in ways that I never thought that I could possibly achieve, but I did.
Yeah, that was amazing. It's an amazing story. It really is, and I highly recommend people go and look at Nancy's site. Now, if you actually type in nancyeast.com, you get to, is it hopeandfeathers.com?
It's both. Yeah, I
Okay,
changed the name. I started it as a riff on an Emily Dickinson poem, this blog, back when my mother passed away in 2010,
right.
just as a way to process my grief. And I've always enjoyed writing. But then I changed it to nancyeast.com when people knew me more by that than they did
Yes.
the small blog.
Yeah,
So,
very cool, very cool. But now this is about dogs, and I got to
right.
confess that I do not have a dog, and frankly, I'm frightened of them.
Oh,
Well, I was bitten by one on my first through hike in 2014. I got cellulitis, which is a bacterial infection of the skin. So it,
right.
it, it worries me, when I see dogs out on the trail, and especially if I see them off leash. But of course, many people love their dogs and they cannot wait to get out on the trail with them. So I'm going to start with a basic yes or no question. Do you hike with your dog?
Yes, I do.
And not only are you qualified to talk about what it's like to hike with dogs, but that tells people straight away, as far as you're concerned, there's a right way and a wrong way, though, isn't there?
There are definitely some best practices. Yes, I think that there is a lot of nuance, and just depends on the situation and the person and the dog and all these different factors. But yes, I do think there are definitely some things that people should adhere to as far as just regulations and leave no trace and taking care of their dogs, good husbandry and good veterinary care, all that good stuff.
Well, as I say, really, there aren't many yes or no answers to this. And you mentioned nuance, so let's get into some of those more nuanced ones. What should I know if I had a dog? If one had a dog, should a hiker know before even considering taking their dog on a long distance trail?
Yeah, I love this question because I think that people really don't take into account a lot of times the individual dog and just its personality, more so even than physical capability, which is equally as important, really. But the personality of a dog comes into play in terms of whether they're going to enjoy the experience or not. And, a lot of people just think of dogs as loving to be outdoors, loving to exercise, and all of that. But there are some dogs that, quite frankly, would just love to be a couch potato all day and watch Netflix with you. They don't really care a thing about going the distance and exercising to the degree that a long distance hike would entail. So I would say that is one that I feel like is underestimated and undervalued sometimes.
Well, as an outside observer in this case, I have never seen a dog who is not having his best day ever. They always look so damn happy. They're jumping about and rushing around. Um,
Right.
so, so knowing your dog's personality, that's an interesting thing. And I, of course, I have them much more, well, much the same way cats have them, I suppose, as well. But I think dogs even more so. So, what are the most common health issues that when you are hiking with a dog, you should look out for?
Yeah, I would say, building a dog's endurance is number one, a really big thing to do before you even set out on any distance hike, especially long distance hike, but even for just recreational day hiking, because that's going to ward off anything that could happen, or not anything, but a lot of things that could happen just in relation to injuries. But
Sure.
orthopedic injuries are certainly something that we see a lot of, whether a dog's just playing ball in the yard and runs really hard to catch that ball and tears their ACL acutely, or is on a trail and just steps down wrong, off of a tall rock or
Sure.
whatever.
Sure.
Anything like that can happen. Foot pads are especially common on trail, just because a dog, if they're not used to walking on a rooty, rocky surface, and they're just used to walking around, say the golf course at home or
Yes.
whatever, where it's a much
Yes.
softer surface, more groomed, that's going to lead to some potential injuries. Heat issues we definitely see, especially here in the South. Summer snake bites is really common. I'd say snake bites puts a lot of vets' kids through school because it's something we see, or
Oh,
through college.
really?
We see a lot
Really?
of that. Yeah. When I
Oh.
was in practice, it was, I'd say, at least a weekly occurrence in the summer that we'd have somebody bring their dog in with a snake bite.
So is that because the dog doesn't know what the snake is a problem, or because generally when I found snakes weren't interested in me and they just wanted to slither away and get out of it, they don't get out of the way with dogs. Then is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the dog. Some dogs have a really strong prey drive, and if they see a snake, they're just going to immediately pounce and try to go after it and have no regard for, the snake being able to fight back.
Yeah.
But then some dogs are really scared and are very apprehensive. And so it just really depends on the dog. But a lot of times it's just an innocent encounter if a dog is just nosing around on the forest floor like they do. And, that's where those snakes are hanging out.
Oh,
And they may
yeah.
come face to face with one just by accident and the snake reacts and strikes. And that's where we see a lot of bites is actually on the muzzle or the front legs. Those are the two common spots, but the muzzle, I would say, has a slight edge, and that's usually how it happens.
And you mentioned about preparing the dog, not walking around a golf course. Does that mean actually do almost doing a shakedown hike for the dog and with the dog? Well, for the dog, actually. Would you say that's the thing worth doing? Because I don't think any of us know what this is a show about the AT generally, so let's talk about the AT.
Sure.
I don't think any of us know what it's like until we get out there. Once you hit the trail, it's so different to anything you've experienced, or certainly in my case, anything I experienced. So it will be different to anything the dog has experienced as well. Would you suggest that perhaps that taking the dog out to less of a just walk around the community walk and go on a proper trail with roots and rocks?
Absolutely. Yep. And build up, and mileage, all those things. And treat a dog just like you would yourself. I mean, I know people go out there and start the AT with no training, no experience whatsoever, but
Got my
of
hand up
course,
here, by the way. Got my hand
yeah,
up. Yeah, that was me.
right.
Yeah.
A lot of people do. I mean, it's just, and most fare well, or some fare well, but you're just really setting yourself up for success and your dog up for a more enjoyable experience. And it's being fair to the dog too, quite frankly, to let them build up, especially again with their feet,
Sure.
their muscular conditioning, all that stuff. And on that note of just conditioning, I wouldn't want a young puppy. People think, oh gosh, a really young puppy would be great to take on a through hike because
Mm,
it's so youthful and energetic. But I would want a dog to be skeletally mature before it even does a long distance hike. And that kind of varies depending on the breed. Generally speaking, kind of the giant breeds would take longer to
sure.
reach skeletal maturity versus a smaller dog. But just lots of those things play into how I would prepare for a dog to go on a distance hike.
And this is going to sound dumb, by the way, so please forgive me. And I might even edit it out. As a hiker, you have to prepare physically, or you should prepare physically, but you also have to prepare yourself mentally. Is there any sort of thing you think of that you can make a dog? I don't know what the word is actually, more inclined to do what you do, because you don't want the dog to do something it doesn't want to do. So, is there any mental preparation you can give the dog?
Yeah, I mean, generally speaking, if you've chosen your dog well for a long distance through hike, they're just inherently going to be totally jazzed about going hiking every single day. That's going to be living their best life. But you can certainly do things on trail because they're going to certainly be impacted by just having bad days too, and may not be necessarily excited about the weather conditions if they're scared of thunderstorms or whatever the case may be. But I would say just on trail regular breaks just like you would give for yourself just to let them cool off. If there's a stream that they just want to plop down in
Yeah,
at the expense of getting dirty and possibly messing up your tent later on in the day with lots of stuff that they collect in that stream on their fur or in their fur, let them do it anyway. Just things like that will go a long way in keeping a dog happy. Snack breaks, fun little treats maybe to give them on trail in
sure.
addition to the dog kibble that you feed them for their meals. And some dogs don't even know the difference between the kibble that they have for a meal versus giving it to them as a treat if it just comes from your hand. They get pretty excited about it.
They get excited about everything from what I've seen.
You're right. Yes, a lot of dogs do.
Is there a general rule of thumb? Because obviously something I learned as a hiker, I didn't hydrate enough, and I still fail at that quite often. So, is there a general rule of thumb about hydration and nourishment for a dog on a trail?
There is. There's a formula that I won't even spout off right now because I think I'd probably botch it, but that you can figure out a dog's just resting energy rate and how many calories they need per day,
Mm,
similar to what we can do. And then, of course, you would want to increase that for a long distance hike. But as importantly as that is paying attention to what we call their body condition score. And that is, well, there's two different scales that you can look at, or scoring systems. One is 1 through 9 and the other is 1 through 5. But you just want that dog to start the hike in good body condition, and then to not drop below what that start point is, just because that's going to, if they lose too much weight, they're just not going to be able to keep up probably with the mileage required of them, that type of thing. But yeah, they're on my website. There's actually a whole host of articles that you can go onto and look for first aid for dogs and
Yeah.
nutrition requirements, that kind of thing. So that's where you can find that information in more detail.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link in the show notes of that so people can look at it at Nancy's site, not only for a hiking for the work she's done with dogs, but hiking with dogs, but also the hiking she's done. And the next question is about the protocol of a dog around the shelters. Is there, people behave the way in which they behave, and some behave badly, some behave not so badly. When you take your dog near a shelter or to a shelter, what do you expect of the dog, and how do you make the dog behave in a way in which you're comfortable?
Yeah, I think number one, really important, and to your point about having a bite, suffering a bite at a young age and how that really has impacted you throughout your entire life, is to
I
be
was
mindful.
61.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So it wasn't a young age.
You were 61
I
when
was
this happened.
61. It was my first ever hike, ever.
Oh, okay. I was thinking it happened when you were younger.
Oh,
Okay.
no.
I mean, not that 61's not young, because it is.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I think just being mindful of others and their fear and apprehension and comfort level with dogs. That to me is just critical when you go into an environment with other people, whether it's at a shelter or just at an overlook, whatever, and to have, before you leave for this long distance trail, really, really put a lot of time and energy into voice recall, training that dog
Right.
to think that
Right.
you are the most exciting thing ever, instead of, the squirrel that they might want to chase after or the person they might want to approach. You've just got to have excellent voice command over your dog and leash control. That's really, I think, something that people, it seems like, increasingly disregard, is just having a leash on a dog on trail. And I'm a big proponent of it for lots of reasons. But if you don't, or even if you do, that voice recall is so, so important.
But
And
why
just
would you
knowing
not,
a lot
though,
of people.
Nancy? Why would
What was that?
anybody not have a leash on a dog? It's totally illogical. It's selfish, actually, I think, if somebody doesn't have a leash on a dog. Or do you sometimes actually let your dog off the leash as well?
I do not, just because I'm just not confident enough that my particular dog would not run off if she saw
Right.
a squirrel, and I'm not
Right.
confident enough with my voice control with her at this point anyway. We have a somewhat new to our family dog right
Right.
now, but even so, I think a lot of people get, honestly, just apprehensive about, using the leash while they're trying to use hiking poles and keep their own balance. I think it probably amounts to that more than just thinking that their dog is totally fine off a leash, because it is harder to hike with a dog with a leash, especially if you
I'm
use poles.
sure. I'm sure it is. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's probably the number one reason. And then some people just think, well, everybody loves dogs. How can you not love my dog? And and that is not the case all the time, as we know.
That is exactly the attitude I have encountered in the past. Yeah, everybody loves them. What's the problem? I don't like
Right,
them. I'm
right.
scared of them. They scare the hell out of me.
Exactly.
And
Yes.
we talk about, as hikers, we talk about our gear endlessly, unfortunately. So can you recommend any specific gear or supplies for hiking with dogs? And you can be as specific as you like, because none of them sponsor us.
Right. Yeah. Nor me. So I would say, yeah, more importantly from the brand is the fit for your dog. Of course, every dog, their body conformation is different from the next dog. And so you just really want to dial in the specifics of, say, a pack, if that dog is going to wear their own hiking backpack,
Uh-huh.
and to make sure that there are no points where it starts to rub and cause little hot spots. Rough Wear is probably the most common brand that I see out there, and I love the brand. I have several things made
Is that
by them.
RUFF?
It is. Yep.
Great name.
And you can find it everywhere. I mean, it's all over the place. Every outfitter that sells dog gear, I don't think I've ever not seen it in their store. But Yeah, it's excellent quality. They really stand behind their products, so that's probably my favorite. But then again, it may be that their products don't fit your dog's torso as well. So you just have to be careful with that and do test runs without any weight in that pack. That's an important thing. You just don't want to go out there with your dog with a fully loaded pack
No,
the
no.
first time you put it on. You've got to build up to that, and
Yeah.
they'll thank you for that too.
Are there certain breeds or size of dogs who are better suited for long distance hiking? Or actually, I'm going to ask it in a different way. Are there certain breeds or size of dogs who are completely unsuited for long distance hiking?
Yes,
That's probably more important, actually.
that is definitely more important. That's exactly where I was going to take that question anyway. So, yes, if you have a breed, and this is kind of your big word for the day, brachiocephalic,
Oh,
that is a
easy for you
breed
to
that's
say.
pardon?
Easy for you to say.
Yeah, right. All that means it's a breed that looks like it's been punched in the face and their face has been smushed in as a result, like a pug or an English bulldog, Boston Terrier, any of those breeds that have that very smushed looking face. They are not meant to breathe well on a good day, much less when they're under exertion. So they are not my favorite pick for a through hike or any hiking, honestly. I mean, they can go
Oh,
short distances and be fine, but put them under any type of physical stress and they just really start falling apart. And it can get pretty tricky fast in terms of just medical things that happen. So those are the ones that I would not. But I would say, any of kind of the working breeds like, German Shepherds or Labs. Bigger dogs tend to do better just because their longer legs are going to be able to keep up with the length of your leg and
yeah.
the stride. But, I've certainly seen there's a book about a Schnauzer, I think his name was Atticus, who summited all the 14ers in Colorado with his owner, I believe, like in winter or something. I've not read the book, but,
Uh,
so little dogs can do extraordinary things too, but you just want to be mindful of what that breed or the mix of those breeds. We refer to something called hybrid vigor, where you've got a kind of a combination of breeds in a mutt, and oftentimes, medically speaking, that just amounts to a more vigorous breed as far as what they might be susceptible to versus a purebred who has a whole host of things that they are usually susceptible to.
Interesting. Yeah, I wouldn't. So obviously, I wouldn't know any of that at all. and and what about extreme sort of heat and cold? Is there? It's difficult to manage that, obviously, because the weather certainly in the last couple of years, particularly on up the Appalachian Trail in the summer, has been horrendously hot for hikers, and I'm sure it's just as bad, if not worse, for dogs. So how do you look after that? The heat exhaustion thing and hypothermia and things like that.
Yeah, I'm glad you're asking this question because hyperthermia, extreme heat, is far more concerning to me with a dog, generally speaking. I mean, certainly they're susceptible to hypothermia too.
Hmm.
I worry more about frostbite, though, like on their foot pads if they're walking on snow or icy conditions, that kind of thing, more than hypothermia typically. But heat exhaustion and heat stroke, that's another thing that we saw regularly in the summer months when I was in practice. And it happens quickly sometimes. A dog will just be going along and you think it's okay, and people don't recognize the early warning signs and or even know what they are, and so that's often what happens, and then it can escalate quickly into a heat stroke, which is a life-threatening problem for sure that they need help from a hospital. But if you've got a dog who is just slowing down a lot more in warmer months, or it starts to pant at a very, very rapid rate, more
Right.
so than what you normally would see just when they're hot sitting outside, or if their saliva starts to get really thick and ropey, that would indicate some dehydration, which typically goes along with these issues. So just pay attention to that. And if that dog starts to slow down, or if you take a break in the heat and it's just not ready to get going again when you are, pay attention to those cues. They're subtle sometimes, but they can really ward off more serious issues quickly.
And when you're out hiking with your dog or without your dog and you see other dogs on the trail, do you look for those signs in those dogs? And if you do, have you ever said to anybody, you need to watch out for this dog because it's not quite right to be going on or something like that?
Yeah, the only time I can think that I've actually intervened was in Great Sand Dunes National Park out in Colorado. There was a couple who had taken a dog up to the tallest dune, and they had not made it by when the day started to heat up. And so on the way down, I could tell that that dog it was like walking on hot coals. And so
Wow.
they were just letting it continue. And I just couldn't help but intervene. I said, yeah, we've got to do something because your dog is suffering right now. And they just were oblivious. They just thought he was trying to get through the sand, as he was going downhill and lifting his feet up
Sure.
just in response to that. But we actually ended up taking turns carrying it down, and he was fine. But I've never really intervened here in the South just because I've never seen something that really has given me pause to that degree.
Well,
But
that's good news. That's good, though,
yeah,
isn't it?
it is.
My because I am slightly against having dogs on travel. Not, it's up to people. If that's what they want to do, great. But it worries me always that we don't know what's going on in the dog's mind and how it is. And the fact that you say that you don't see much sign of mistreatment or bad treatment of dogs, then that's a good indication that people are paying attention to their dog when they're hiking with them, doesn't it? Really?
Yeah, I think most people, generally speaking, are pretty aware of their dog's comfort level out there. Again, the hyperthermia can sneak up pretty quickly on them.
Right.
But since we're kind of in the green tunnel, it doesn't tend to happen as quickly here.
Sure.
At least as it might out west or places like that.
Sure. And managing the amount of walking that your dog does during the day, is it just once again a case of watching for signs that are done for the day? Because we often like to push a little bit longer or try to get the next shelter. The dog has no idea there's a shelter there, so
Yes.
the dog doesn't know how far they're going. Do they tend to let you? Let's talk about your dog. Does your dog tend to let you know they've had enough for the day?
Yeah, I would say usually if they're just, will stop and just not want to continue. Some dogs will follow you to the end of the earth, no matter how much they hurt, and so those dogs are hard to sometimes know when they have had enough. But if you've got a dog who, if you stop for a moment and you've got to really encourage it and control it to keep moving, that would be an indicator that they're kind of done for the day. Or if they're limping at all, if you're seeing just even a barely perceptible limp, I would definitely stop that dog. That's another thing to do just preemptively before any long hike. If you're going to through hike with a dog, is to really get them used to you messing with their feet, because that's something you want to do every single night,
Mm.
is to check those feet, and especially between the foot pads. That's where things like to get caught and, cause issues later if you don't address them pretty quickly. I usually will tell people, if your dog hikes a lot, it's just really best if they get groomed to ask the groomer to clip the hair between those foot pads as well and as short as they can without it causing any discomfort to the dog.
Right, and I know that you mentioned earlier on, we talked about a dog being on a leash earlier on, and sometimes they are, sometimes they're not, but they can get aggressive towards other dogs or hikers or even other animals on the trail. How do you manage that? Because yours is on a leash, so I presume that's what stops it straight away, or do they then keep going and have this need to be aggressive towards other animals?
Yeah, as soon as a dog approaches me on a trail, if my dog's on a leash, which 99% of the time it is, and the only time it may not be is if, we're stopped for the night and we're in the campground or campsite or whatnot. But if I
Sure.
see a dog that's unleashed approaching, I quickly let that person know. I don't know how my dog is going to respond to your dog off leash, because sometimes what happens, this weird dynamic, if a dog is on a leash and the other dog is not, the leash dog will sometimes get really stressed about that because they know that they're somewhat limited, by the leash, and they will react
Hmm.
in a more aggressive way towards the unleashed dog. And so that's my concern more so sometimes than not even knowing the personality of the other dog. And so I'm very quick to let that person know, if you could please get a hold of your dog and just, make sure you've got some control over it. That usually wards off things pretty quickly.
How do other dog owners take that?
They usually are pretty responsive to it because I'm friendly about it. I'm not ugly and obnoxious. Now, if that dog comes and, like runs up to my dog and starts to growl at it or do anything, and that has happened, that's where it gets really scary to me, because you don't want to get hurt yourself trying to break up a fight, but yet you've got to protect your own dog. So I'll try to put my dog behind me at that point, and that's where
Hmm.
that good voice control comes in, because
Sure.
if you've got a dog that will listen to you and obey that command to get into a certain spot, that's going to help a lot too.
Now, this could be another question I take out in the editing, I'm not sure, but are there any certain medications or supplements that can benefit a dog hiking on a long distance trail, actually benefit its health and performance?
Yeah, well, before we get to supplements, I want to just mention because it's something that I get on a soapbox about regularly
Oh,
with
right.
people who are resistant to it. And most people are not resistant, but the two things that to me are non negotiables, really, for any dog, whether it hikes or not, are heartworm prevention. And especially if they're outdoors any amount of time, which pretty much every dog is if they go to the bathroom outdoors, is some type of tick prevention in the summer months or really, or, year round in some climates.
Hmm.
But ticks, Lyme disease is becoming, as I'm sure you know, an increasing problem throughout the entire United States, not just in the states that it used to be more isolated to. And dogs are very susceptible to Lyme. And that could be a showstopper for your hike, but
Of
also
course.
just, limit your dog for a long time if it doesn't let up quickly, if you don't get it started on antibiotics or it's too late to really make a dent in it. So those are the two things, the heartworm prevention too, because those are spread by mosquitoes. And so out on a trail, of course, mosquitoes are going to probably plague us at some point. So those are the two things that I would really want to impress upon people, as well as vaccines, of course, as well. There's some vaccines, specifically one for leptospirosis, which is a bacteria that can be basically it shows up in water sources out in the backcountry
Right.
from the urine of infected animals. And so if say your dog drinks from a stream or a puddle or whatever that's been contaminated with that lepto, it can then get sick if it doesn't have the vaccine. But back to your original question with supplements, it's kind of dog dependent. There are some supplements for joint protection, like glucosamine chondroitin, that type of thing, omega-3 fatty acids. Sometimes they add to certain dog foods, even for breeds that are more prone to arthritis. So that'd be a conversation I'd want people to have with their vet so they don't do something that really isn't going to have much benefit for their dog. But there are definitely some things that dogs can benefit from depending on their situation.
That turned out to be nowhere near as dumb as I thought it was going to be. My
No,
question.
that's a great question. No, that's a really good one. Yeah. Yeah.
And is there a, and I'm sure this it depends upon dog again, but is there an age beyond which a dog should not be out there?
Yeah, that's a tricky one because every dog ages differently. Generally speaking, the larger the breed, the more accelerated the aging timeline is. They just don't live as long as, say, like a Great Dane won't live as long as a Chihuahua in general.
Hmm.
But I would say if you're just looking at kind of an average medium to large size breed that you might have on trail, it's probably, if it's following just a regular course of aging, in 8 to 10 years is going to be slowing down and probably starting to develop some creaky joints that would limit how far it can go. And you'd want to at least, address any type of arthritis with some dog specific medications for arthritis. You never want to give a dog any type of NSAID, like a non-steroidal, like Advil or Tylenol that you give
Hmm.
yourself. That could definitely be toxic or is toxic to dogs.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just depends because some dogs I've seen at a young age develop arthritis because they have what's called dysplastic joints, meaning that their joints just didn't form the way they should. And so things don't connect in a way that keeps them healthy, at a young age. So you just want to really pay attention to how that dog's mobility is as much as anything, as well as their heart condition and all that. But regular vet checkups are going to reveal a multitude of things that could be hiding under the surface that you might not necessarily catch.
Sure, and funny enough, I don't want anybody to think I hate dogs or anything like that.
No, no.
And I know that but nearly everybody who has a dog love them beyond life itself, and so that they care for them and they want to make sure that dog's okay as well. And I'm sure they watch for signs of things happening all the time. So it's kind of it warms my heart that that's the case, that it's very likely that people are watching out for their dogs as well as they possibly can.
Oh, yeah.
And I know I sort of took this question out, but I'm going to put it back in just for the end. How, because it is the dog's hike, not your hike when you take a dog. You have to look out for the dog, obviously. But how do you keep your dog motivated and engaged during a long hike? Or is this something you just see how they're doing and then respond to how they're doing? Or can you actually be proactive about making them engaged?
Right. I think, yeah, to be proactive is better than being reactive. So keeping that mileage within what feels comfortable to them, what you've trained for. Don't go out of the gate so hard and fast that you've just, caused them to bonk and then, be potentially scarred from wanting to
Sure,
go hike
sure.
the next day.
Yeah.
Break when they're slowing down or just don't seem interested. If a dog all of a sudden wants to take off with somebody that you pass on trail instead of you, that's a sign that they're like, wait a minute, this person might be going slower and might stop for me, actually. Some dogs would never do that, no matter what. They're going to be loyal to a fault,
Yeah.
but some, will if they perceive somebody as, or if somebody's say stopped at an overlook and that dog just really won't go at that point, that's a sign that it needs a little bit of a break. Cooling
Yeah.
off in streams, like we mentioned earlier, dogs tend to love to do that even when they're not even overheated. So things like that can go a long way in keeping your dog happy.
And you already mentioned about checking for ticks and the pads. So at the end of a day's hike, do you, as a hiker and a vet, obviously, and understanding this stuff, what do you check for in the dog to clean it and make sure it's okay at the end of each day?
Yeah, that great question. I would definitely do a thorough tick check, as thorough as you can. If you've
Mm.
got a thick-coated breed, that's going to be next to impossible.
Yes.
But that's where
Yeah.
the tick prevention really comes into
Yes, I'm
play.
sure.
And some this is something that people would call us about regularly. They'd say, "I've got my dog on this expensive tick medicine, and it had a tick attached to it, last night, and I had to pull it off." And some tick prevention products, actually, the tick has to bite the dog for it to work, but it doesn't stick around long enough for it to transmit anything like Lyme disease. So that's the benefit, obviously, is that it doesn't stay long enough to do that. But
Sure.
it depends, because there are some products that they ingest orally, some that you put on the back of their neck, and there's even a only one specific tick collar that I can really recommend, but it just depends on the product. So I would definitely just at least scan them for things like ticks. And then I would also check their foot pads after a day hike, maybe not so much unless the dog's limping. But if I'm on a multi-day backpacking trip with a dog, every night that's going to be part of my routine, is just looking at those feet, treating any types of abrasions, like a calendula salve sometimes is helpful for that.
Like a what?
Dog
What was
food.
that? You've just thrown jargon at me
Oh, yeah,
again.
yeah,
No
calendula.
idea.
Calendula is the name of it. It's like an herbal salve, and it actually works pretty good on things like that. There's also a product called Musher's Secret. You can buy it on probably online, like Amazon, places like that.
Uh-huh.
It's some proprietary blend of something. It's a short ingredient list that I don't necessarily know, but it's really helpful for dogs. Not so much to put on their feet and then let them go hike in their bare feet, because it picks up debris. It's kind of thick and waxy, but it's great if they need some type of a buffer, over a wound or just a very
Sure,
mild abrasion,
sure.
that kind of thing, if you're going to put a bootie on them anyway, because of the conditions dictating booties. And by the way, I don't recommend hiking booties for all the situations. A lot of dogs, or a lot of people, will think, oh, my dog needs shoes just like I do when I go on a hike. Not necessarily. It's
Oh,
very terrain specific, and even, yeah, terrain specific in terms of rocks and roots and all the things they'll hike on, but even uphill and downhill. I have heard of people even putting just booties on their front feet if they're going uphill, and then, or is it downhill? One way or the other. Downhill, they need one versus the other, depending on what's, I think, yeah, downhill is the front feet, and uphill, sometimes their back feet
oh.
need booties.
Interesting,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah.
And they were my questions really. But is there anything that we haven't covered? Do you think could be helpful for listeners, or have we just covered the subject? You think reasonably well?
I think we've covered most things pretty reasonable, or reasonably well. I would say, yeah, the only thing just is to make sure you just keep that conversation flowing before a through hike with your veterinarian, just because they're going to be just a key player in alerting you to things that could happen with your specific dog based on the breed or the combination of breeds.
Uh,
Get those vaccines, and rabies especially, as well, up to date. I would get a dog, any dog that I take hiking, microchipped, or any dog, period, that's a pet. And that's just a little chip that we just inject underneath the skin, and it lives there the rest of the dog's life. You can actually see it on an x-ray if a dog ever gets an x-ray. But if that dog should get lost and somebody finds it, if it doesn't have identification on its collar, or the collar's lost, somewhere along the way, they can take it to a vet or a shelter, and they will scan it with a reader that picks up that chip number, and then there's a database that they can
Good
actually
Lord.
figure out who the dog belongs to. And dogs get rescued all the time because of microchips that are found, either wandering around town if it just escapes a yard, or on trail. So that's something that I highly recommend.
Well, look, thanks so much for doing this, Nancy. It truly isn't my subject, as you could tell. Yet you've educated me today. You told me so much stuff I didn't actually know, and hopefully you've educated some of our listeners as well. So thanks very much for coming on the show. I appreciate
Absolutely. It was an honor. Thank you.
it. Okay, nice to speak to you. Cheers then.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
As often happens, as soon as we hung up, Nancy said, "There's something I wanted to mention." so away you go.
Yeah. So one thing that people really want to be mindful of, whether it's a day hike or a long distance through hike, is regulations of the agency of the land they're traveling through. So for instance, Great Smoky Mountains National Park is just a mecca for people bringing dogs on trail, and they're not allowed. And so I see it almost every time I go on a hike these days, is a dog wandering the backcountry of the Smokies. And there are 2 trails that they are allowed, but it is not the Appalachian Trail. And it's trails along the perimeter of the communities, like the Gatlinburg Trail and the Oconee-Lufty River Trail. Those are the 2 that they're allowed on. But everywhere else on trail, they are not supposed to be, and you can be fined. But more importantly, it's to protect the trail and the wildlife and all the things that the park's trying to do. But just make sure that you check before you set out that a dog is allowed where you're headed to.
Yeah, good thing to remind people as well. Okay, great. Hope you all found that helpful, if only to understand how important best practice is when it comes to taking your 4-legged friend out into the woods, either for just a day hike or even a through hike. I must say, Nancy spoke with such authority and clear language that even I understood it. As I say, I'm uncomfortable around dogs, but I certainly don't begrudge anybody taking theirs with them. I just wanted somebody who knows technically what to do to give you all the best practice. I think she did just that. So thanks, Nancy. And you really should check out her site. It's full of information, great blog posts, and her many adventures out on the trails. I've put the link in the show notes. Now Steve Nota brings me up to date on some extraordinary weather that they're experiencing up there in New England. As you can hear, I had absolutely no idea what he's talking about. Here's Steve.
Mighty Blue, how are you, old mate?
I'm good. How you been?
I'm well, thanks, my friend.
So where are you now? Where are you now?
I am sitting on the porch of the Hostel of Maine in Bigelow Mountain, in Bigelow, Maine.
Oh, the Bigelows are phenomenal, aren't they?
It's been something else for sure. I have not seen much of them.
Oh, really? Why not?
Rain.
Oh, really?
Because of the rain. A lot of fog, a lot of rain. So tomorrow, though, I do the slack pack of the Bigelows, and the Beatles song "Here Comes the Sun" comes to mind because it's finally supposed to be sunny around here.
How bad's it been then?
Horrible.
Really?
Horrible.
How long for?
The storyline of Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine has been, it feels like I should be in the UK, mate. Foggy, cold, and damp.
Oh, dear me. Are you still having fun, though?
Yeah, my fun meter's pegged, mate. But I've had enough. I had enough fun. I'll tell you. The trails are extraordinarily wet.
Yeah.
And you might recall New Hampshire and Maine, when they do get wet, that dirt just turns into chocolate pudding.
Yes, I found, especially in Vermont, personally.
Vermont was remarkably dry and not muddy compared to New Hampshire and Maine.
Oh, jeez.
I want to call New Hampshire New Swampshire, to be honest. It was something else.
So you're not getting all the views that you were hoping for, then?
Sadly, not. No, I had one. Look, I had a wonderful climb over Moosalok.
Right.
There's no other way to say it.
That's
that was
great.
A great day,
Yeah.
and beautiful views. Franconia Ridge, look, in retrospect, was good compared to the whites. It was a humid day, so you didn't get those spectacular views, but
Right.
you did get views.
Yeah.
The whites were a washout.
Oh,
So I had one beautiful night. It was funny. The climb up Webster Cliffs to what is it, Lake of the Clouds,
all right.
was a cold, foggy. Well, it wasn't cold, but it was a drizzly, foggy day up that climb to Lake of the Clouds,
Yeah.
and around sunset, 4 or 5 o'clock, everything cleared up, and it was a beautiful sunset, lovely moon reflecting against the Lake of the Clouds, the lakes of Lake
Yes.
of the Clouds.
Yeah. Beautiful.
But in the morning, it closed right in again. So the climb up to Mount Washington was in fog, and it was fog all the way around
Oh dear.
the traverse to Madison. Fog, fog, fog.
Oh dear me.
And of course, with the fog in the drizzle, the rocks were slippery as
Course.
hell.
And you know what? Then you go down from Mount Washington, and
Don't even talk about it.
That's a tricky climb. Talk to us about that.
Oh my goodness! It took me, I thought to myself, because I was going to have a zero in Gorham
Right.
at the Barn Hostel.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I called the guys. I said, yeah, book me up. I should be there for your 12 o'clock shuttle.
Yeah.
And, for 6 miles, right, from Madison Hut down to there. And my goodness, it took me till about 1 o'clock, and I was going hard. I was pushing. And, couldn't make it. Ended up getting a hitch into town, which was fortunate. Spent the day there, and then off he went off. Actually spent 2 days kind of recovering. That's right, because I did. They offered a 1 day slack pack to go over the Wildcats.
All right.
But I said, yeah, there's no way I'm doing that. Yeah, it's not going to happen. I'm not doing a 20-mile slack pack. that was, and I'm so glad. And I'm so glad that I said, hey, look, I'm going to leave the bulk of my gear behind, but taking my bag, taking my tent, a night's worth of food, and all the rest. That was the smartest decision I ever made.
Wow.
Because I'll tell you, you got up and over the Wildcats, and then down. We didn't make it into Carter Notch Hut until about 1 o'clock. And that was only 5 miles into what our planned 13-mile hike was going to be.
Wildcats are some of the toughest. One of the toughest climbs. It's one of the toughest days out there, I think. And I know most people who've done it feel the same way as well.
Oh, I agree. It's crazy. The whole White Mountains were just. It was the trail on steroids, man. It was just something else. It just tore me apart, and literally did. So, got through it, thank goodness. But I've done a good number on my back. Had a couple of falls a couple of days ago.
All right.
And twinged a muscle on my back. So
Nasty.
that was on Sunday. So took a lazy day yesterday and doing it again today. And thank goodness I'm not walking, because right now it's starting to drizzle again. So welcome to New England. But anyways, it's supposed to be a sunny day, so hopefully the trail does dry out a little bit,
Yeah.
and a bit more sure footing, and I can push on. I mean, I'm too darn close to finishing this to say, okay, a pulled muscle on my side's going to stop me.
Yeah, sure.
So I think Motrin or ibuprofen is going to be my friend for the next 2 weeks, and I'll push through.
So what's your latest? I mean, what's your total mileage you've done so far?
Well, I'm just about done. So I went over 2,000 miles yesterday.
Right.
No, 2 days ago. Went over 2,000 miles.
So it's all straight run now. There's nothing to fill in at all behind you. So you've got the whole thing, and you're ready. So what have you got in your mind when you think you might finish?
I'm hoping the end of the month.
All right.
Around the 28th.
Right. How exciting!
That's my plan.
Are you getting excited, or you now think I'm ready for this to be over?
I'm saying I hope this damn back of mine doesn't keep me from doing it. You know how you've talked before about you're one step away from not finishing the trail.
Sure.
And on Sunday I had my I slipped, right, on,
Yeah.
like, as you do, going down one of those steep, bloody rocks. And, had a bit of a twinge.
Yeah.
I said, okay, just be careful. Slowed down a little bit, kept on going. And, lo and behold, about 30 minutes later, whoop, same, fell the same way. And it was like, oh my God, that hurts.
Yeah.
And that's when I said, OF.
Oh dear me! Oh dear me! Oh dear me!
Oh dear me! Yes, dear, oh dear. So I sat there for a minute, and it was like, it was crazy painful, but got up. Thankfully, somebody, another, who was it? Babs walked by, and she said, "You need some Motrin." Because I didn't have any with me that day. I was slack packing.
Sure.
And it's the first time I've ever used Motrin on the trail, and I'm so glad she gave me some. And that kind of, dulled the pain. And off you go. I continued that walk. That evening, laying in bed trying to roll, it was like, oh, this hurts.
Yeah.
So I said, something's going on. So I'm just trying to rest it, see if it'll come back. And, so as long as it comes back 50%, because really after the Bigelows tomorrow for that slack pack, it's pretty much, reasonably smooth sailing from there. Nothing's complete, nothing's flat. It's not like you're walking along a paved road, but,
yeah, you'll be.
As we all know,
it's nowhere near as. Trust me, it's nowhere near as flat as it looks. So
after going through the whites, it feels that way.
Well, there is that, I suppose. Yeah. So last time we spoke, you were having a bit of an issue, or some time ago, about your weight because you'd lost too much weight. Have you stabilised it now, or are you starting to even put on weight or not?
I have. I've stabilized it. I probably have put on a pound or two. I'm feeling much better in that regard. So,
sure.
Look, and that all comes down to I've been taking more town time and eating a lot more.
Sure.
And it has helped. I certainly feel better on the trail because of that.
Good.
Probably spending a bit more dough than you'd prefer, but what the hell? I mean, that's why you got the money.
I always say, Steve, when you go into town, you hemorrhage money.
Oh, hell yeah. Tell me about it.
It's incredible, isn't it, really? You think to yourself, how did I get through all of that stuff? It's because you're eating more than you used to. You're probably drinking a bit more than you used to as well. So it's just great but it's still great to be out there. I mean, every time I listen to you guys and I have these interviews with other people and so on, I always think to myself, oh, God, I wish it had been my year this year. But, it's lovely to listen and to hear about how it's all going. And so you're thinking by the end of the month. So what we'll probably do in that case, we'll probably catch up again next week because you're near the end. We want to hear your last couple of weeks as they go. So
okay.
So reach out sometimes in about a week and we'll get together again, okay?
Yeah, sounds good. If all goes well, I'll be in Caratunk in 3 days. And then in Mons in 2 or 3 days later.
Is it open? Is the canoe taking people across, or are people having to wade across these days? Oh, good.
It is open. It's been open, and although the trail's still wet, muddy.
Yeah.
It's not like it was at A-Ball Bridge in late June when it was 4 feet of water.
Wow.
So that water's gone away. Although I got a picture from a mate who is in Western Massachusetts, dealing with those floods.
Right.
And he was in knee deep water walking along the trail, having the time of his life. Some other friends of mine were by Bear Mountain, and of course that bridge is closed.
What
bridge?
Bridge
across the Hudson's closed.
No.
Bridge across the Hudson.
Why?
Well, because of the access to and from it. The bridge itself is fine.
Wow.
But because of all they got 8 inches of rain, so the trails are washed out. The roads are washed out.
Yeah, the roads may be washed out, but you could walk across, couldn't you, surely?
Apparently you can't cross the river. Yesterday.
Wow.
I mean, it was for me, for instance, last year, when I bailed out to go back to Massachusetts, I took that line, the rail line, the Harlem line, I think it is. That's washed out. That's shut down. Metro North is shut down from Pauling and from
Wow.
I forget what town it
Wow.
is, because of all the trees that have knocked down and rock slides and the rest.
Jeez.
Can you believe that the train lines are out of service? I'm sure they'll open them up in a day or two.
The more I hear about other people's weather problems, the more I realise how lucky I was when I went in 2019, I tell you. I really do. Well, look.
Jesus, tell me about it, mate.
Stay in touch and we'll get you back on next week, okay?
Sounds good, brother.
Cheers, buddy. Take it easy, okay?
Okay, all the best. Bye.
Bye. After we spoke on Tuesday morning, I went straight to the news on TV and saw what he was talking about. Horrendous. As I said, I'm glad my year was relatively benign when it came to the weather. Steve and everybody up north right now are really going through it. I hope that they'll work out how to complete their hikes, or at least get as much as they can completed. Still, Steve always sounds pretty jolly, doesn't he? So I guess he'll cope. Thanks as ever go to our donors, with Natisha Webb and Gail Posey, our monthly donors, while Steve Vilsack also kindly donated. Thanks to each of you. Just before we hear from Joanne Flagg, I wanted to remind you all about our Woods Hole weekend, coming up at the end of September. I'm still finalising the itinerary, but basically we meet on Thursday lunchtime at Weary Feet Hostel, hike on the AT and stay overnight at Dismal Falls, where you'll see a few presentations on starting a fire, filtering your water, leave no trace and so on, with plenty of practical tips to take away from the four of us. Then in the morning we'll hike back to Weary Feet before driving to the legendary Woods Hole Hostel, where Neville treats us to a beautiful food and great hospitality in an experience that is truly not to be missed. That afternoon, then all day Saturday, we'll have workshops and presentations, some of the time back on the AT at a shelter, before another wonderful dinner, another overnight at Woods Hole, and more tips and tricks the following morning after breakfast before heading home at lunchtime. If you're interested, and we've already got about 50% of our maximum places earmarked, just email me at steve@hikingradionetwork.com and you'll get first refusal once all the details are known. Now, let's hear from Joanne Flagg, who's in Maine.
Hey, Steve.
Hey, Joanne, how are you? Long time no hear.
Yeah, I'm good.
I'm sorry about the messing about trying to get together.
Me too.
So where are you now?
I am climbing Wyman Mountain in Maine.
Wyman
So
Mountain.
I've been through the Whites, the Mahoosuc Notch.
Okay. In that
and
case,
the Baldpates.
oh, aren't they amazing? The Baldpate Mountain's just incredible, isn't it? Absolutely.
Yes, it is.
Absolutely remarkable. So tell us. Well, let's go through some of those. You've done the Whites, the presidential. Now, what's the weather like up where you are right now? Because we're recording on the Wednesday, the July the 12th, and I've only recently seen on the news how horrendous the weather's been down in Vermont, and so you're past there, obviously. But has it hit you as well?
It did hit us. Today, it's beautiful and sunny, kind of hazy. I can see the fog down in the mountains because I'm at a lookout.
Isn't that a great thing to see, to be above the clouds and the fog and so on? It's just marvellous, isn't it?
It is. I'm really looking forward to that in the south too.
Yeah. So you got the weather. You got rid of that. And did it get you down at all? Did it go on for a long time?
It does beat you up a little bit. I was a little bit beat up. The rocks were really slippery. I talked before about how hard it was to plan and make decisions in the Whites to begin with, because the terrain's different. You know, you have to go slower, and yet there's fewer places to stay. And then with the rain, you went even slower and stopped into the huts. We really enjoyed the huts.
Did you actually stay in them? Did you stay in them as a guest?
We did stay in one because it was getting late and it was windy and raining. And so we stayed in Sealand Falls Hut.
Oh, I remember that one. It's a nice hut as well.
Yeah. But we also stayed in the campgrounds where you can get the through hiker card that gives you a couple of free snacks and a free soup. And
nice.
In the hut. So we did that, but we would stop at every one and get a coffee and a snack, and you just throw a couple of dollars in the basket, and it's just a fun thing to do, use the bathroom and get water and things like that.
So what was your impression of the Whites in terms of difficulty? Does it feel like it's all ramped up?
I thought the Whites were hard because of the weather.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a lot of climbing and steep, which was fine. It goes slow, but trying to make decisions, you think you're going to get a certain distance and it's bad, or you spend longer somewhere than you thought you might because you feel like you need to. And then you can't get where you're going. You're on a ridge line. So what do you do?
Yeah. Talk to us about Franconia Ridge, though. I mean, that to me is still one of the amazing sights of my life. I just suddenly came out of the trees and I started giggling. It was like a moonscape to me. What was it like for you?
It was my second time up there. I had gone up there last June, almost a year ago to the date I was there this year.
Right.
So it wasn't new to me, but that is one of my favorite spots to. And I hadn't walked up on the AT before, so we went over onto Mount Liberty as well, and that to me was really cool as you climb up on this. It's a blue trail off the AT, but you climb up on a rocky knob up out of the woods, and it just is you're just up there on top of everything. And
I think we did that as well.
360-degree views.
Yeah, I think we did that as well. Yes, it was definitely worth doing because I didn't do many blue blazes unless it was to shelter. I didn't do many of the outlooks because walking 2,200 miles, who wants to do an extra 200 feet? So
right.
that's how it always felt. So that was the Whites, and it is difficult. I mean, I don't get what anybody says. It is difficult to do that. What about, did you enjoy the presidentials? Because first time I went in the presidentials, I saw nothing. Second time I saw everything, which was great. Did you enjoy the presidential range as well?
I did enjoy it. And we got some views. Again, it's very hazy, but when we first started, we didn't get views. On Franconia Notch, we got lucky. People earlier in the day were sucked in, but by the time we got there, we had views.
Nice.
And then before we got to Mount Washington, we saw nothing. And then when we got to Washington, there was a little bit of holes in the clouds, so you could see there were mountains back there. And then we went around. We came off of Washington and around Jefferson, and we had a view out through there. We could see Washington, and if we saw Madison, I didn't know it, but I don't think we were that far yet.
It's
and
true.
It was 6:30 at night, and we sat down on the edge of the mountain to take a break. And the sun was behind us, and we're looking out in front of us. And then it started to sprinkle, and the sprinkles went by us. And I said, there should be a rainbow somewhere. And so in a couple of minutes, here comes a rainbow.
Lovely.
With one end of it right in front of Mount Washington.
Oh, how special is that?
It was so beautiful.
I bet it was.
And then it started raining again, and the rocks. We still had a ways to go. It was a long ways to Madison where we couldn't stay, and then the hut. So we went around the back of Madison to the Randolph Mountain Club shelter, the Perch, which took us 1.5 miles on trail.
Oh, I didn't know of that. I didn't know of that at all. I never even heard of that.
Really slippery.
Oh, crikey. Yeah.
So that was a little harrowing.
Yeah. Talking of harrowing, how was the Mahoosic Notch?
Oh, that was fun.
Yeah, I think it's fun as well. But we've got somebody on the show today who talks about no, not today, but in a couple of weeks' time, who actually fell into one of the crevasses in Mahoosic Notch. So that wasn't good at all for him. Yeah. So tell us about.
I thought I was going to.
Did you?
Yeah, I was coming down one of the slabs of rock, and I thought I'll just scoot down here, but I slid instead, and thank God there was a root at the bottom of it, because I just, I don't know, is it the movie The Goonies where they fall into this hole and it's like,
Oh, fantastic. Yeah, it's such an adventure, isn't it? It's just, are you still feeling this, are you feeling the adventure of it all still?
The Mahoosic Notch was invigorating, and then coming up over West Baldpate,
right.
It was raining, and the wind was blowing the rain sideways, and the rain was stinging the tops of my ears, and we were climbing up that big rock top, and it was just so cool.
It's so exposed though as well, isn't it? It's so exposed out there. So how many miles you got to go to Katahdin now then? I know you've got quite a bit more to do, but how far you got to go to Katahdin?
Like 240.
Right.
240. but I'm going to try to get to Munson as quickly as I can.
All right. So you refer to we. Who are you hiking with?
I'm hiking with Sheepdog, and then BD just caught up with us. She's done a lot of it. It's been the three of us a lot together, but she has a different pace and goes off and does her own thing. And then right now she's with us again. So
it's nice sometimes. I know that when I got into the Whites, I was grateful for the fact that I met, certainly the first time, my friend Lidenot, and I was with T-Bird as well, to be with somebody in such dangerous areas. For example, had you fallen into crevasse, you would have wanted somebody to get you out, wouldn't you, really?
Yeah.
Do you feel a sense of comfort being with somebody?
I do. Sometimes I'm by myself when it's the hardest for me because our paces are different. Sure. But still, if I didn't get to my spot at the end of the day, I know somebody would come looking for me.
Right. So you're one of the few survivors we've got in the Mighty Blue class of 23. Once again, the curse of the Mighty Blue class. Although with 15 or 16 starters, we couldn't have expected more than 3 to finish. Really, they're the odds.
Yeah.
That's kind of what happens. But you're still going, and I know you're quite halfway yet, but you're certainly getting there. What's your plan once you do get to Katahdin? Are you going to go straight down south or what?
Well, I'm going to Iceland.
Oh, of course you are. I forgot about that. Yeah, because why not? Yeah. Why would you not?
Yeah. So that's the deadline that I'm trying to. So that's been really hard on me is knowing that I have a plane ticket that I need to be there for, and am I going to get to Katahdin in time?
Do you wish you weren't going,
or am I going to need to pull out? Nope.
So you get to Avid Bridge, and you've got to go.
Yeah.
Would you leave Katahdin and go to Iceland?
I think I would probably pay the money to change my flight.
All right. Yes.
Because I'm hiking in Katahdin, but I got a couple of days leeway.
Right.
Or I'm hiking in Iceland, but I have a couple of days of sightseeing first.
Right.
So conceivably, I could delay my flight a day or two.
Yeah. It's a shame to have that hanging over you, if you know what I mean, having an end date. I mean, these people who come from abroad to hike over here have to get out of the country after 6 months. So the need to have to hurry, I think, is probably one of the worst ways you can hike, the need to hurry. And, it's one of those things, it will be better if you didn't have that. But, you knew this right from the beginning. So it is what it is.
Right.
Yeah.
I've also had times when I wish I was going a little faster, but I was with other people. So that's a lesson, too.
Yeah, well, it's your hike management, isn't it? You manage your hike throughout the whole time, don't you? And change.
Yeah, you do.
You make changes and you live with your decisions. So that's the way it goes. Well, look, I'm so glad we caught up, and I'm so glad you're still enjoying it out there, which you seem to be, and so glad you're still going, which is even more important. So we'll I certainly want to speak to you before you go to Iceland, and obviously as soon as you get back from Iceland, and tell us about that. But for now, best of luck, and let me know what happens. And we'll record in probably a week, either next week or the week after, when you should be somewhere near it.
Okay, that sounds good.
All right, then.
I'll keep in touch.
Cheers, then. Bye.
Cheers, Steve. Thanks. Bye.
She's doing great, though that fall in Mahoosuc Notch must have been a bit hair-raising. Great to hear how well she's doing, and I hope we can hear from her as she approaches Katahdin and before she heads to Iceland. It's quite a summer she's having. Now, before we hear a short part of Chapter 21 of Then the Howl Came, I want to tell you all something that I found out this past weekend. I'm going to warn you up front. This is sad news, at least it is for me. I wanted to let my hiking family know this because it's you guys who have always been supportive and understanding, at least from the kind emails you always write me. My son Rob, about whom I wrote in my book about the trail on my 2014 hike, has died. He was only 42. I found this out last Sunday afternoon by a means, I suppose you'd call it. You just wouldn't believe if I told you. Involving a text from my dead son's phone. Putting 2 and 2 together, my girlfriend Dana searched for and found and noticed that he was cremated back on June the 22nd. His mother hadn't told me of his death, nor his cremation, so I not only didn't know he was dead, but I missed the opportunity to attend his funeral. Of course, I would have flown back to the UK to be there had I known. I'm telling you this because I want you to know that I'll regret not mending fences in the past year with Rob, though I reached out many times. I hope that you, if you've fallen out with one of your family, Take every opportunity to mend those fences, because when they go, there is no way back. I love my son. I'll always miss him. I've said before, I'm not sure if we're ever quite the same again when we lose somebody we love. We get on with life, we smile again, we laugh again. But a little bit of our heart has gone, and that will never be replaced. I felt that about the passing of my mother, and I feel it now, deeply, for Rob. So, hug the people you love this weekend. You never know how long you're going to have them. I'll see you next week. Chapter 21. Wind. Glencliff, New Hampshire to Gorham, New Hampshire. The Whites. Saturday the 3rd of September 1983, mile 1754.6. The same sad old story. Originally yesterday was supposed to be an easy day. I should have been able to take my time over an undemanding stretch of trail and save my strength for the White Mountains. I needed the rest. My legs were feeling a little beat up from the 2 big climbs on Thursday and the humping I had to do that day in order to make up for my late start. Then, of course, I blew any chance for a restful day yesterday by getting an even later start. I found myself grinding out more fast miles on tired legs, struggling to reach yet another road crossing by nightfall. What this all boils down to is that my legs were doubly sore today. Shooting pains were running down the muscles of my left thigh on the steep stretches today. Unfortunately, virtually all that today's trail had to offer was steep stretches. My mission for today was to climb the highest mountain on the Appalachian Trail since Mount Rogers in southwestern Virginia, about 1,250 miles ago. I was at the trailhead on New Hampshire Highway 25 at 1:30 p.m. I know. Once again, I had my work cut out for me, thanks to a late start. I was looking at a 6-mile, 3,728-foot climb, followed by a 3-mile, 2,932-foot descent into Kinsman Notch, the kind of backpacking trail that makes your knees ache merely by reading its description in the guidebook. The Green Mountains of Vermont, the Smoky Mountains of Tennessee and North Carolina, and most of the other major mountain ranges along the Appalachian Trail are all long, basically continuous ridges. New Hampshire's White Mountains are a series of shorter, roughly parallel ridges separated by deep, narrow, glacier-carved valleys called notches. The terrain is spectacular, perhaps unsurpassed on the Appalachian Trail, but it is rugged country for backpacking. I will be making my share of long, precipitous climbs and descents over the next week or so. At least I know what I'm getting into. I've already backpacked the entire section of the Appalachian Trail which lies between Franconia Notch, the divide between Kinsman and Franconia Ridges, and Madison Hut in the northern portion of the Presidential Range, most of it several times. There was very little climbing along the first mile, from Route 25 to Jeffersbrook Shelter. That allowed me to make good time early in the hike, but it only meant that the remaining 5 miles to the summit would encompass most of that big climb. I left a quick entry in the shelter register and resumed hiking. There continued to be very little climbing along the next mile of trail after the shelter. I passed the first weekend hikers, a typically lively Labor Day weekend in those mountains, a quarter mile past the shelter, at the point where the AT turned onto a dirt United States Forest Service fire road. 2 vans were parked at that trailhead and a bunch of people were unloading a ton of camping gear. It appeared that no through hikers were going to be able to make use of Jeffersbrook Shelter tonight. Those people were about to make it their own private cabin for the weekend. The nice thing for me about day hiking this heavily used portion of the AT is I need not worry about jerks like that hogging the shelter in which I had planned to stay on any night. The Appalachian Trail briefly followed the USFS fire road before turning onto a paved road for a while. Eventually, the trail turned off that road, passed through some fields and re-entered the woods. That was the point where the real climbing began. During the next 2.5 miles, the trail rose about 2,800 feet, an average grade of about 20%. It was a typical White Mountains trail, deeply eroded and covered with exposed tree roots and rocks. I stopped twice, very briefly on that long climb, in order to catch my breath, but otherwise kept on plugging away. It was an extremely warm day for early September in these parts. I sweated like a politician hooked up to a polygraph. I passed several day hikers along that climb who looked even worse than I felt. Nice guy that I am, it cheered me up a bit. The AT finally reached the ridgeline near the south peak of Mount Moosilauke and turned onto the traces of a very old carriage road, which it followed along the ridge for the last mile to the main summit. This road had been built in the 1860s, when a rustic hotel was on the summit of the mountain. The hotel burned down in 1942, and the carriage road has long been abandoned. Today it is simply a wide, rocky foot trail lined with 8-foot tall spruce. Their aroma filled the air, reminding me of my childhood when my grandfather used to take my brother and me to pick out our Christmas tree. Just for old time's sake, I tried to find the saddest, skimpiest specimen on the ridge and imagine it decorated with my grandmother's exquisite antique ornaments, but increasingly expanding views soon distracted me from this stroll down memory lane. The spruce gradually diminished in height as I ascended the narrow ridge crest. Soon they were little more than stunted dwarfs, and I was surrounded by panoramic views. Eventually, the spruce disappeared altogether, giving way to alpine vegetation as I climbed the summit peak. This mainly consisted of a plant which resembled golden brown grass, rock lichen, and low shrubs which grew out along the ground rather than up into the violent, destructive winds which frequently lashed these exposed summits. Quite a few weekenders were on the summit. You meet some good people in the mountains as a rule, and most of these were no exception. There were, however, 4 unbelievable idiots who were off the trail, lying on a carpet of the grass-like plants, all their gear spread out around them. I guess they noticed the signs asking people to please stay on the trail and warning that merely walking on the fragile alpine plants could kill them, but they didn't let it trouble them. After about 20 minutes I started down. The descent was very steep, even worse than the ascent had been. For about a mile the trail dropped sharply over huge boulders with many steps installed along their sheer faces to ease the difficulty somewhat. The steps looked like a recent improvement. I cannot imagine how treacherous that descent must have been without them. It was rough enough work even now. Nevertheless, it was a very scenic trail, running alongside a series of attractive cascades. Surprisingly, I only ran into 2 more weekenders along those final miles from the summit to the road. I arrived at New Hampshire 112 at Kinsman Notch at 6:55, almost a half hour later than I had expected to be. My ride was also a half hour late, so no harm done. Still, I know I'm back in the White Mountains when it takes me 5.5 hours to hike 9 miles with an almost empty pack. The next few days should be quite interesting, unless I can get some early starts. Yeah, okay. It has occurred to me that, while I went to some pains to describe the forests of the southern Appalachians, which I had never seen before this hike began, I've neglected to adequately describe the northern forests, perhaps because they were already familiar to me from past hiking trips. Tomorrow, I'm going to attempt to rectify that omission with a slightly extended entry on the next section of the AT.